Hey guys, this is the guy that made those videos, and just kind of was thinking about maybe doing an update of some kind of ideas that have been going around, and just wanted to speak to thank you guys, all the people who've watched the videos, and everybody who's into researching this stuff. They're some of the most genuine, heartfelt people that are really just willing to be so open and really go there. And I think that's really, really great and exciting, actually. So I just wanted to maybe go through a couple of ideas that I've come across, that you've come across, and we can compare notes. We can, there's all this stuff that's out there, and, you kind of hit a wall with it sometimes. So I like these kind of audio journals from people who research this stuff, because you can kind of compare across the board with all this stuff that's going on with this type of information. Anyway, so maybe just to mention some of the great names out there. First comes to mind is George Kavasilis is awesome. I'd give him a 9 out of 10. I think he's amazing. Then I think of Robert Cox has got these great lectures on the different mystery teachings. Got to give a shout out to Manly P. Hall, Secret Teaching of All Ages, and the Philosophic Research Society, all those guys. I'm going to go ahead and just make a list of some great points of research down in the description down here. Anyway, I just wanted to talk maybe about a few couple things that, since my last video, I've kind of been thinking about, kind of been researching and getting into. Holographic kinetics has been really a point of interest. Just further sort of thinking about the duality debacle. How do we balance good and evil? There's a few different styles of balancing good and evil. I'd like to maybe discuss the difference between, are we coming from a place of understanding that's neutral and empathetic towards good and evil, or is it this version of good and evil where we practice and express in equal portions good and then have the half of us which is evil? So there's a very subtle yet important distinction to be made between those two types of duality. I do think that we're all immortal beings, and I'm always about common sense, actually. Common sense, even over logic, because sometimes logic can be more biased than common sense. I'm into feeling into something with my heart. Like, what is my gut feeling about something? What does my insides have to say about this? Because if you get so caught up in all of these books, all these different speakers, and they become like your main drive, all of a sudden it's not you anymore that is going through these types of ideas and research. It is those ideas that you are making yourself. It's like you become like these different cookie cutters, which is kind of opposite the idea in many. I hope that kind of makes sense. But so yeah, maybe I'd like to get into the idea essentially that we're all immortal, and the common sense would say, what are the chances that you would happen to be alive just this time? What is that, 1 in billions of years of the existence of the universe, that this is, you just happen to snap into life? I would say if you're alive at any given point, common sense would say that you've always been alive, because the odds are against you that this is just happens to be the one time which you are alive. So therefore, everything which is living must have always been living, in my opinion, of course, discernment, all that good stuff. You guys know the drill with all that, so I don't have to go into endless disclaimers. But so yeah, essentially, so if we've always been living, I've had these different things on my mind, and I used to go ahead and use shamanic practices, and maybe I can talk about that for a second here. I'm going to kind of jump all over the place, but yeah. So with shamanic practices, that was something I got into because my personal faith that I grew up in, Christianity, I essentially revisited it because I always felt maybe I didn't try hard enough. And so I tried really hard looking into different translations, looking into the history of the Bible, of the Vatican, and that immediately raises some very interesting questions and predicaments. I talked to my pastor very wholeheartedly, like, why is God jealous? Why did God have to kill those people? Why are we, like, using a human sacrifice rather than being Christ-like ourselves? Just different contradictions, different things that just... It doesn't feel like it's actually like a personal spiritual path. It feels like a spiritual club where you are praising and you are worshiping this deity which is not equal to you, which you are always subservient to, you are fearful of, and you are loving them, and you are essentially at their disposal as a slave, essentially, or a follower, to put it nicely, at the cost and threat, at the threat of your eternal soul in damnation. Now that's a pretty heavy status quo, and I can't give any religion really so much credence and so much. Essentially, it's like the reality has been rigged this whole time, so how can you really hold anybody responsible for anything? If you're going to take a soul and you're going to trick them into essentially becoming your follower and going into your domain in their afterlife, and you know perfectly well how slanted our views of death are across the board, it's essentially... it's not fair from the get-go. So essentially, it's all null and void. Of course, if you believe that you must go along with these beliefs, then that's going to take precedent. Consciousness is so powerful. I've been able to experience that firsthand, exactly how everything is consciousness. So if you believe there's going to be a guy in a white robe with a gang of angels and they're going to come and take you to the right hand of the Father, well, they're going to have quite a herd to feed the Father for another couple go-arounds, in his domain of the samsara, essentially wheel of life type of a cycle. So this is a really interesting situation when you really start researching across the board, and it starts to form this picture of the Earth. And essentially, in my opinion, it is like this play. It is a play. And at the end of the day, really no one can be held responsible because we're all in these different states of awareness, and, we'll run around in these loops if we convince ourselves to do such, because the reality is this sort of feedback existence that will deliver what you put in it. I think maybe this reality that we're inside of may be a tweaked version of reality, which is within its own other layer of reality. What we are thinking of as dimensions and densities, I believe, are essentially like a 3D cake. This has led to this, has led to this, and these are the layers of awareness. So when you're within, you're down this deep, so to speak, you're essentially in this level of awareness and this level of the whole reality. And one leads to the next, leads to the next. You know, the fractals, the fractal style of existence, the cycle, which leads to the next cycle. Like there's these main ideas which come out as essentially being how it works. We see it in the nature of the way that the plants grow. We see it in the way that the sun operates, how the sun in the solar system is like its own atom. It's the same structure, and then that's a fractal of a galaxy, and then that's a fractal of a universe. You know, it's a specific model which it presents itself. And again, the interesting thing is that that is within the context of this reality. We can't know what other realities are like when you're within a certain dimension of awareness. You know, that is your context of experience. If it's not accessible, if it's not an accessible color on your palette, you're not going to be painting with it or experiencing it because it's just not there. So what is this particular reality? And I know I'm going all over the place. This is, you know, I hope maybe this will just be kind of fun to listen to, maybe. This will be my first one. I'm just going to kind of go for it. Maybe it'll get better, you know. Anyway, so this reality, what is this reality? It is this like comic book adventure of colored light that's like this ancient extraterrestrial holographic technology that is reality itself. You know, it's actually really crazy. It's really a shame how mundane and how narrow reality has been molded and propagated into. But I feel like that shows a certain attitude which is present in the reality. So you start to see all these things which are indicators. What is it an indicator of? What is it implying? And as you're starting to create your picture of what reality is for yourself and those around you. What are the indicators? What does this imply? What is the motive of this element of reality? And you start to build the picture yourself. Not from some book that you, whatever New Age or whatever scripture it is. Yes, those can be great tools to craft your image. But it's your heart. What is it that resonates with you? And then what is it that doesn't? And how are you forming this picture, which you cross-reference this speaker to that speaker and their experience to this experience, and then, the Tibetan Book of the Dead and the Egyptian Book of the Dead, and look at the correlations that are here. You start to really form a specific picture. Of course, you can't know 100%, but I think that there's enough information out there through cross-referencing when you can actually start forming a useful, logical, common sense picture of what is going on, and you're doing it through your heart. You're being honest with yourself, and you're really genuinely starting to, really move your way down this path. And so back at just maybe an idea of what is this reality. Now, I've been fortunate enough to take a peek into some different levels of this same reality. I was going to talk about shamanism. I think shamanism is great, but just like all the other single paths, they have a glass ceiling. to them. I went ahead and went for shamanism because I felt like this is going to actually give me some tangible proof. It's going to give me the spiritual experience, which I've read about but have never had. It felt like, almost like in a scientific method, this is going to be the trigger, which is going to result in B. So I knew what was going to happen. There was kind of this fail-safe. It wasn't like how some people will be, and I'm sure they're absolutely genuine when it's, oh, I suddenly was in this other dimension, in this other domain, and it was happening, and it was nothing that I did myself. I went ahead and made the decision that I'm going to go ahead and do this myself. I'm going to go into this knowing that this is a duality, that this has positive and negative connotations, effects, reports. I'm going to go into this, and the more that you go into it, you realize I'm understanding that this is a grander, yet still limited paradigm. This is the way I was going into these other domains was going through the mental gate. And then I could bring my heart up into there, but it was still like, oh, you know, you're kind of coming in through a back door, so this is, you know, you got a few minutes here. You know, let's make the best out of it, because the nature of reality is to make the best out of things, whatever it may be. But then we're going to kind of go ahead and put things back to normal. But that was perfect for me because it gave me the proof, you know, I guess that's the like Western archetype within me. I wanted to see for myself, and I got to. It's, you know, it's, the other domains are beautiful. They range, I'd say the quality of what the reality is made out of is it's like that of clay, soft, smooth clay, which glows in the most vibrant color. Still the same color spectrum. And this is seen with my eyes closed, and then the darkness is replaced with a place. And you have this sensation at a certain point where you pop up and out of your body. Now, this place is very natural feeling. It feels like, oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, this is like you're like back home, actually. Yet you're completely taken aback by this moving palace. That's the vibe it gives of this vibrant clay. And it's oriented, and there'll be archways there. It's built with architecture. I'd say the architecture is a mix of Mayan, Asian, Roman, and then the Indian architecture. It's actually a mix of those. And then it even has this little twist to it that looks like Hebrew text. So it totally lives up to the hype of another dimension. That was really satisfying for me. And it's as though the walls themselves and each spot it is alive, and it's sort of like, huh? Like, oh, hey. And then other times, it's like, ah, here we are, like we've been expecting you. And you essentially, me personally, go through this progression where you have kind of your own sphere, and then your sphere you can extend outwards. It's sort of like an aura. It is like your aura. You can extend it over here, and all of the controls are insanely inherent. I started to manifest something before me, actually, and these little sphere blocks, these little spheres pop up, and they start to form the shape which you're thinking of. And as soon as I started thinking about, like, oh my goodness, I am actually manifesting something before me, I broke that thought, and the manifestation instantly disappeared. So the reality itself is insanely user-friendly to the point where you start thinking about it too much and it dwindles away. You are so much in the moment with it and in the now with it, and simply passive is the word I'm thinking of. But it's not passive because it's just your pure consciousness itself without being tainted by, oh, wait a minute, or wait, let me second guess this. It's just sort of you flowing as yourself very genuinely. And as you would do this, it would attract a certain kind of one of these layers of awareness. So I've had negative and I've had amazingly positive experiences, and it's depending on the sort of takeoff point. I liken it to thinking of the idea of when you're dying. And what is that person's state of mind? What is their state of awareness at their moment of death? And what would that naturally attract them to? That has been, without a doubt, what I've experienced. I've gone into it extremely anxious, going, oh man, you know, you start to see the room around you change. It turns into that soft clay texture. You see Mexican tile patterns that are shifting and starting to talk with you telepathically and read you. And, you know, there you go. It's that's really why, you know, we ended up cutting back from it, because we had gotten some really great insight, had some amazing experiences, and wanted to respect that and continue naturally. Because honestly, at the end of the day, we learn all the same things in this reality. They just come through more subtle, but it's the same exact things are realized and experienced. So those were some amazing experiences. I could maybe talk about one. A negative experience going into it with anxiety, the nervousness in my body and in my emotional state matched the shaking in the walls of this place. And there was this intensity to my state in that moment that then perfectly matched the place which I was now inside of. And the way that these walls were phasing and the light was phasing, matching my anxiety, the red and yellow appeared like flickering flames. And the wave form, the way that it would layer over on top of each other and flicker in this instability, appeared like the flickering of flames. And I immediately thought, oh my goodness, this is what someone would think is hell. So I did meet a being in that place, and it was a humanoid figure made of the flames, made of the anxiety itself. And he stood attached to the wall in the crucifix position with his head hanging low and his arms holding up the ceiling of flames. His legs crossed, come down, and they spread out like roots to make up what is the floor. And he slowly raised his head to me and then just dropped it. Just like the feeling of trying to hold the space and trying to be this anxiety, not being able to get over it, and still holding this space and just sort of hanging your head there, just stuck. You know, at the time I wasn't as experienced, because I've been fortunate enough to have experiences where when I meet a being like that and I can feel them, I can actually like sort of joke around with them and sort of just say something pleasant and bring some goodness to them, or just a different feeling to them. For instance, I'm hopping around here, but I guess I'm, yeah, just going to go with the flow. For instance, I was met with a huge snake in the other, you know, domain. There are animals there. It's almost like the shape of the energy itself kind of will look like galloping horses. And it's like, oh, that's where the shape for galloping horses came from in the first place. Because it's kind of this sandbox. And you can imagine, oh, trillions of years ago, these super consciousnesses playing in these sandboxes of waveform, of color, of, you know, what, looking through this energy this way while observing it that way, and, you know, seeing these kind of common themes come up when you're doing all these infinite potentials, you know, because you're making reality itself, so it might as well be as far going as it can be. And, you know, we're the heritage of that family. I feel very strongly if you're in it, then you're part of the family. There goes a tangent again. So anyway, here I am with this snake, and the snake tells me telepathically, and telepathy is really natural too. It's just, you know, how you think in your head a thought, and it's kind of in your own voice. It's a thought of a voice in your head that isn't yours. And it's like you're being spoken to and you're hearing it in your ears, but you're hearing it in your head, like you hear your voice when you're thinking. So it's very natural. You don't have to do anything special. So the snake, it tells me, I want only to destroy you. I want only to destroy and oppose. That is the energy that I am. That is who I am. That is what I choose. And he poised to strike at me. And I told the snake, I said, I will respect your space. I will respect you. I will respect you for who you choose to be. And then I now ask that you return that respect. And that you respect me and you respect my space in the same way which I respect you. So there's a balance in the kind of relationship. And then the snake settled down into his coil and relaxed and was, you know, tame, so to speak. Those are the kinds of things that essentially make up life. The kind to exchange in energies, to go through the hills and see another human and you put your hand up to wave and as a peace offering. It's an energetic exchange between nodes. And look at how far it's come. It's really, look what you can do with limitless energy, limitless creativity, and infinite amount of time, infinite existence. It gets to the point where you're like, well, you know, I'd really like to see what a finite existence is like so I could kind of have maybe a more relative perspective. So it even goes to that extent. Let's start limiting ourselves in particular ways. Let's play out all these things that have happened in fractal form so that you as consciousness can experience so much as possible simultaneously in a fractal form, where you're essentially repeating the stories of the universe and you're learning more and more, growing more and more, because as one cycle of experience comes to an end, all of that new evolutionary data generated then creates an entirely new starting point. And in this fashion, we see how, look, it grows and grows and grows and grows. We can see that in our world, how the J-curve of technology expansion this microprocessor now makes it possible to create this microprocessor, which is 10 times more efficient. And then we use that microprocessor to then create this new level of technology. And this is the grand picture that sort of is telling you everything. It's like, read me like a book, discover me. I'll put you in the thick of it. Here, this is an interesting thought exercise. So let's say you're a jaded immortal and you are your higher self and you're out there in your kind of consciousness field, aware of all your portions of self, aware of the whole thing, and you have always been. The way I like to think about the idea of always have been, I was actually shown this once in an experience. You know, I don't know whether to really trust my experiences per se, but this is still you objectively approach it, yada, yada, yada. Anyway, the idea of always having existed was shown to me as a gray surface, and this soft gray ripple, just barely different than the gray, starts slowly, then goes faster, 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 and whoop, a little white seed shape appears in the gray surface. And the feeling I got from feeling into this, and that was communicated to me, was this was sent from the future, when the progression had already started. And that seed of progression was then sent continuously back in time and continuously progressed ahead of time, so that you have this moment in the middle that is growing towards what had already been accomplished. So a little bit of time travel would allow for something that had always been and that would forever progress in both directions. And that the universe knew how to grow because it had already essentially been implied in that seed that was sent back. It's as though reality knew this would imply this, and then this would imply this, because this is what happened. Oh, let's take that progress and let's send it back in time and start it over again. Oh, look at this new peak we're now at. Let's do it again. Oh, man, look, you know, that's I'm trying to just get the feeling across, just the idea across. So anyway, you're this jaded immortal, always have been, always existed. And one of your buddies comes up to you, like one of the other universes, like you're your universe, they're your universe, or they're their universe. And you're all kind of hanging out like in the multiverse, so to speak, as your higher self. And they're like, hey, look at what Joe Schmo over there is doing with his universe. He's doing this thing called light. Yeah. It's this new way to play with new way to play with emotion, feeling. And the way that the light works is you can actually create miniatures of all of us in its expression of the light with these building blocks. How cool. Yeah, and he's inviting us to go and learn it for ourselves, and then that's going to be a new one of our paintbrushes. That's going to be a new one of the colors on the palette. Because of this general constant growth, this leading to this, and then it's all integrated and then taken a step further. So this would be the point of like, oh, check out light, man. Like you got, you know, put a little portion in and learn it. Here's the thing though. You're going to have to experience every single layer of the light if you're going to use it. You just have to, because you need to know. If you're going to be using light, you need to know all of its aspects. That's going to be part of the process of adding this paintbrush. And but it's a portion, you know. And then they say, and another part of it, part of the experience of light is they can create isolated paradigms that are like trickster puzzle realities, that they'll put fractures of your spirit, stick them inside of there, and they'll use you as a battery, and they'll give you amnesia, they'll make you stupid. That's part of it too. So you're going to risk losing some portions of yourself. Not really losing them, you're just going to not get them back for a very long time, and they're going to come back to you as raw base material. It's going to lose its individuality. Because these things always eventually exhaust themselves in the universe, but it can end up taking a really long time. But, you know, what's a really long time to us? Ha ha ha. So most of, you know, it could be said a third of the heavens. Side note, really frustrating thing about all the occult teachings, mystery schools, etc., scriptures, is that they know this story, they know these ideas, and on purpose, they isolate it, they tweak it to their particular club's liking. It's like a bunch of preschoolers that are feeling really happy and proud because they made it sneaky, and now you got to decode it through symbolism, and it comes off really petty, and it comes off really elitist, and it comes off completely opposite the whole point of all the stuff to begin with. And it can be really frustrating. So I feel like you can get the ideas from the scripture, but you got to have one damn strong level of discernment and patience to sort of take the jewels out of the rough, so to speak, and then to sort of put it together like, oh, this was the core idea, and then this was what was done with it. It's a headache. Anyway. So everybody's putting a portion of themselves into this light universe. And so you come in as your like highest self. You're aware of what you're doing, you're getting your feet wet. This is the least dense. Let's say there's 15 layers of density. And then there may be layers within those densities, and there may be 144. Or maybe the 144 model is like the Borg, Yahweh, New Jerusalem model that is then within another reality. Yada, yada, yada. So you come in, and you come in at face value, and you experience the least dense of the light experience. This is like they're really selling it to you. It's like, oh, this is really great. And it is really great. It really is. You just really got to use it responsibly. And then you go through that whole level experiences, and you're like, okay, I've pretty much like gathered as much as I can from here. Let's go a step further. So it's like everything you did in that first cycle then sets up your starting point in the next cycle. And you know what you're going to be looking into. You know what you want to experience. And then you go through that. You go through that level. All the while, your higher self is kind of kicking back, doing their things, and sort of watching it like a TV, one of the many TV channels that's sort of keeping them going. You know, I think a Shiva floating there with all the flowers and things. Anyway. So you go through that level of experience and that cycle of stuff, and you're the bad guy, and then you're the good guy, and then, oh, there's no duality here because we're still so consciously aware. We know how to be neutral, and we know how to be thoughtful towards this, but then we have to know what not being thoughtful is. We need to know what this extreme version of this one, of this being this kind of a god on this kind of a level, with all the servants, and then feeling this way, and do we get caught up in this? When is enough enough is a very important indicator for a spirit's journey. Then that indicates this much, which then it's like, okay, I got everything out of this cycle. Now let's take it a step further. And as you're going along, there's these things that have come up that are very difficult predicaments. And those really, really light densities are like, oh, this came up. This is tough. Let's push this on to the next cycle to take care of because, we got to enjoy ourselves, We'll take care of it. Of course we will. So this gets put into the next cycle, and that's what is naturally called for, and that's what's naturally thought to like, oh, let's generate some evolutionary data on this kind of circumstance because this happened, and this guy did this to that guy, and she did this to her, but then this happened, and so the fractal starts to grow. And then you go into the next cycle, and you got those things that keep piling up. That's really tough stuff, like, oh, this group completely fucked their environment because of selfishness. And they ended up having no way out, and they did this to themselves, their own free will, and they too are like us, higher selves. We should really pay attention to that. Oh man, and then this one guy, he got really, really like into himself and into the whole creator thing, and then he got guys under him that were a little bit insecure, and then they boosted him up further as they became more insecure, and created this kind of relationship that is doing this J curve of him becoming more and more egotistical and becoming more and more locked in his paradigm, locked in his selfish point of view, that it's gotten to the extent where he's enslaving entire races, fracturing their spirits, creating whole realities based on all of his creator knowledge, which are keeping those fractured pieces always scratching at a glass ceiling and generating him more energy the whole time. Uh-oh. That's a real head scratcher. That's going to have to be part of the universal story, the universal experience of light, because it happened. All these guys got really stupid. Their consciousness hit so low, they could barely scrounge around to do anything. So then somebody came in and helped out, but then that caused all these kinds of issues. It is, of course, this limitless, awesome, amazing sandbox, of course. But realistically, things come up, things happen. So the universe shows how smart it is. Because even in the most tweaked, the most hijacked, the most taking control of and manipulated circumstance, since they're still working with base reality components, it's all still informing the whole, and it's all still part of the fractal story experience. So it still only adds to the evolutionary data and still only adds to the experience. And since it is all contained within its own universal reality, it's kind of a controlled rodeo or controlled hurricane. It's like, let it be the Wild West for Wild West's sake, and we can do it safely. Kind of this attitude of, if it's in the kids to want to rough around each other, to want to dabble in some darkness, you can't just keep telling them no. That's only going to build their resentment. Let them have it. Let them do it completely as extreme as they can. We'll make sure it's done safely, but it is far better to let them work it out than it is to let it pent up and to do nothing with it. And hey, why don't we make the best out of it and we learn from it too? And that it becomes part of the evolutionary story experience. So this is like how smart it is, because even in this deep, it's still working for the home team. And he's got to bury his head very far into the sand and has to work so hard to keep the card house, to keep most of it up, because the card house is always falling down. It's always falling down. It's always in decay. And you got to work so hard to keep it appearing as though that it's like up, and to keep trying to stack it up and keep it going. It's, you know, it is what it is. So what's really special about this particular experience, this, when everything is compressed this much, like you got stupid, you got apathetic, you got all these spiritual paradigms, you got all this corruption politically, spiritually, environmentally. Nature itself will be the model of the consumption nature that puts you in a state of amnesia, that gets you, forces you to consume and to start a belief system in a way of life based on consumption. This is a real humdinger of a chapter to get through. Like I was saying, you go through cycle to cycle to cycle, and the real tough stuff, we're at the bulge in the curve. It started out real dense, and this is the tough part. We're at the tough part. Because I think part of the reason that it's like, you know, you'd think you'd be a god or you'd be in the super high realms at the tough part, I think it's actually the experiences of the gods. They're super complex, super crazy, but in their own right, they're actually very clear cut, especially since you have such access to intelligence and such access to expression, resources, lack of limitation. It's oddly more clear cut than, say, a human experience that's just so in the middle. It's sort of like the rocks, and like being a rock's a really tough thing. Like being this base form of the bird intelligence is really like tough. And then you're isolated in this specific kind of a hacked reality where you're forced to consume to survive in a state of amnesia. And essentially, you have to force your way out of it. You can still be nice, though, along the way, actually. You can still be very considerate. I think that's one of the real beauties of this experience, is that since you've gone through it to that extent, and then you're in an experience that's so compressed with so many fractaled things, in that point of, in that level of compression, in that experience, if you can start to have forgiveness for the whole thing and you can start to empathize with everything from that point, it is as though you are integrating it all. It's like you're actually doing it. Like you would have to be in that state. And then you would have to pull it all together, because then that's how we hit all the bullet points. If we just told you all this and you were up in your highest state, that's completely different and it's a completely different experience, and you don't know it for yourself. It's secondhand information, and then you're essentially just doing a cookie cutter. But if you experience it, you let it occur organically, as hands-off, as divinely intelligently as possible, to really generate that genuine experience where the natural evolution of it will always eventually integrate the whole kit and caboodle. It'll integrate all those aspects, and you will come out the other end having reintegrated all those densities, all those tough times, all those great times. What a mediator you would be. What a spirit you would be. You would be neither extreme, yet you would know intimately either extreme. And after that cycle of experience, what would come next? So you've journeyed through all of that to work so hard to even put yourself into a really bad situation with the cards stacked against you, so that you would be effectively recreating in fractal form the cards stacked against you in all of those not so pleasant aspects of a universe of light. That would be a required part of the experience. If you were really trying to integrate it all, to experience all the different levels, and then you're trying to rise up again, it would be modeled that way. Look, you know, it's such an evolution itself as a process, making the best out of things, always growing. It would result in taking all that evolutionary data into account and then starting again, as we see. Because then what happens when it gets to that point of, okay, now we've gotten everything out of this cycle, the cycle of all cycles, of all the stuff we kept sweeping under the rug, all the reasons we kept beating around the bush, integrate all of those, and then we got the most out of that cycle. Well, that would result in something new altogether, because we don't know. Because we hadn't gotten to that point in time yet. That would indicate the reason, like this idea of the Montauk project, the time machine can only go to the certain wall of a date because reality hasn't started molding it yet. Some things are kind of already set up in stone and waveform, and because of what the experiments we're doing, supposedly, would allow them to go so far this way or so far that way, and very rarely to these other kind of like points. That would actually make sense, because we are arriving to this point which evolution has not yet been at. It doesn't know, because it's just now getting ready to start and use all that evolutionary data that has been generated from all the different galaxies, all the different layers, all exchanging with each other at the same time. Oh, on and on. One time a being had told me, this has been going on for a very, very, very long time. And I've had this repeating experience where I'm experiencing this archetype of some kind of a mad scientist that created some kind of a reality machine that I would put myself into and put myself through all these different possibilities until I would genuinely come out the other end with the desired results that I had intended. And I kept being in doubt. No, I'm not at the other end yet. There's no way I'm at the other end yet. Am I really at the other end yet? It's been how long? So, in my opinion, yes. Eventually, no matter what happens, the answer is the same. Which is very comforting. Even if the crazy apocalypse happens, even if you get taken on an alien spaceship, even if you actually have the right level of way to look at everything, because you were taking notes along the way and you were building it up for yourself using your own common sense and using your own heart, then you are equipped in any scenario, on any level of awareness, to remain you, to be your sovereign self. And you have at your disposal, having been there and done that. Not in this, I'm not talking about this experience here. I'm talking about when you pop out and you go back to your general level of awareness that is your whole level of awareness, or more whole level of awareness. It was done on purpose because so it would be there. Then you could go into any hell and know to not step on anybody's toes, know where they're coming from, and hey, help a couple of these guys out that actually genuinely want it, and know to not allow this like violent force to mess with you, because you are that being that is that. You are the grand mediator because you had done it. The way shower, so to speak. Way shower almost sounds a little loaded in a weird way. I like mediator. So you could be in any extreme hell. You could be in any extreme heaven. And then in the extreme heaven, you can kind of like notice this like self-righteousness, or trying to like sheen over this kind of a thing that just, you know, is a little bit below them, or maybe they get isolated in self-righteousness on a plateau with other plateauees, and they all really boast each other. So then in any circumstance, it's like, of course, it's at your disposal. It's common sense. It is you. It is your way of being. And then you are in your now, you know, at your, the whole everything, all levels of interface. Because it is you, because you hit all of the bullet points, and because you ended up coming out the other end. That idea of the forge of spirit that will just beat and batter you in great intensity, but then you come out like what's the idea? What is Christ-like? I'm fine with Christ-likeness. The rest of it is whatever. Because that idea is there. It's like you have love for all beings, you have understanding for all beings, you have endless empathy, you have only love because you had been there yourself, and you know what it's like. And how can you hate them? How can you fight them then? How can they actually get you to feed into fear at that point? Because you know what fear is, you know how it works, you've done it yourself. And then you experienced the process of not playing along anymore, calling it out, being assertive, standing up for yourself. And if this is an intelligent evolutionary process, the process would know that's the kind of being that would come out the other end, that would be really useful to have around, that won't get caught up in this or won't get caught up in that. And then we can feel comfortable about them using that as a responsible paintbrush because it's like, that's exactly who I would want to be using light. You know, thank them for having excruciatingly gone through this process to hit all of those notes. And then you can't hate any of the archetypes at that certain point because you realize, oh, that's it, that is what it is. I'll respect them doing their thing. They respect me doing my thing. And I'll grow a little bit further because of them. I can't hate them for organically becoming what they've become. That is me on a certain aspect of myself. You know, that we're all in the same family. And when you don't go along with their program, what are they going to do? You're not the fish in the barrel anymore. Because you're not the fish in the barrel anymore. So, I think it's really, really cool how this whole thing ends up working. And to kind of end up summing it up, I am very grateful for this experience of learning how to make endless lemonade from endless lemons. But what's very important in the process is to not become a lemon yourself. And to not become stagnant in always having to make lemonade. Because then you're respecting everybody and respecting yourself. And always be discerning. You think you're in the highest heaven? Check again. Reveal your true form to me. Feel into things. It sounds silly, like, oh, only certain people can feel into things. You take the time to focus on something and then to pick up on that subtle feeling of something, you will be amazed. When you really start to pay attention to it, it's like, oh yeah, that's how I automatically feel about that right off the bat. Pay attention to that. Be tender with it. Be sensitive to it and feel into things. How does it feel? Because that will always be with you. When I've left my body, everything of this world, my body itself, I could not remember what eyes were. All my worries and stresses, those weren't with me either. I had no idea you could relax that much. But those are the things that are always with you, is your discernment, your common sense, your experiences, what they have resulted in, you have become, who you are, the whole spiel. And this is the best way to learn it. Not from some school that already has it figured out, but this playground that has all the division, has all of the on and on and on, results in that kind of a being, at the same time recognizing that that's an isolated paradigm of control that could be a total virtual reality for all that we know, that is simply feeding another race and another layer of reality. And that's part of the story. That's part of the whole story. So the grand picture becomes clearer and clearer every day. I love you all so, so much, of course. And look forward to the next one of these. And for now, this is me saying, talk to you later. Bye-bye.